Which existing cut of Superman 2 do you think is the much cleaner version? Do you think the Donner cut would have been better if they'd started with writing one movie at a time? Well, what is the cleaner version? Without question, I do not think you can debate this. The cleaner cut is the theatrical cut. Which is the better cut? Which is the better story? You can debate that. If they had been allowed to actually properly finish the Donner cut, I think easily that is the better cut. That's the better story. That did not happen. So if you don't know the backstory on this, essentially they hired Richard. They wrote Superman 1 and 2 back to back and intended to shoot both movies in one session, one very long filming schedule, and then release them pretty close together. So they hired Richard Donner to do this. They had this massive script. Mario Puzo wrote the first draft for it, gigantic. Then they rewrote it by Tom Mankiewicz. Richard Donner's hired. The actors all love Richard Donner. The producers did not. And he butted heads with them, and they wanted him to cut corners, and he wanted to make a good movie. And so he shoots 80% of Superman 2. But they're getting to the point in time where they ran out of money, and they're like, we just need you to finish Superman. You stop working on Superman 2. Just finish Superman so we can get that movie out, and then we'll do Superman 2. So he literally shot over 50%. They say about 80% of Superman 2. And then they said, let's just do Superman 1. And we're worried that we need a big slam bang finale. The turn back time at the end of Superman 1, that was written as the end of Superman 2. So they took the end of Superman 2 and they put it on Superman 1 and they have him finish that movie. But because they did not like working with him, they butted heads with him, he butted heads with them, he gets fired when they decide to finish Superman 2. They go to do Superman 2, they bring in a different director, and to get directorial credit on a movie, you have to have directed over 50% of the film. Richard Donner had already shot 80%. So they rewrote the intro to Superman 2. They added some little sequences here and there, and they added some slapstick comedy, and then they just finished shooting what wasn't shot. And so this turns into, this new guy comes in, he shoots over 50% of the movie, and so you have a version of the film that is different. Not radically different, but it is different. And tonally, it definitely shifts because it adds in some cornball slapstick humor. The director of Superman 2 went on to direct Superman 3, which had way more cornball humor because he got to make that whole movie. Jump forward. When Superman Returns come out, they went, Richard Donner, you're a legend. You did 80%. Can we finish the movie? Can we do this? And they released this about 20 years ago, a little less than 20 years ago. They released Richard Donner's cut of the film. And so 30% of what was different, they had the footage and they just could plunk it in there. And then there was some percentage of the footage which was shot by the other guy. And so some of it, they used the footage from the other guy. And then some of it, they just had to cut corners. Today's video is brought to you by Factor. This past week, it finally got cool enough here in Texas to pull a sweater out of the closet, and sweater weather pairs nicely with fall foods. But if you're like me, your schedule's too busy to prepare all of those meals that you would love. That's where Factor comes in to help. Their chefs do the shopping and the chopping to bring you fresh, never frozen, fully cooked meals right to your doorstep. All you have to do is heat and eat. When it comes to meals, everyone wants options. That's why Factor offers 35 wholesome meals every week, including Gourmet Plus, Keto, Calorie Smart, Vegan Plus Veggie, so you'll always find something you love that suits your lifestyle. I always go with Keto or Protein Plus. Factor has over 60 plus add-ons to keep you fueled and focused 24/7 with a plethora of flavors. You'll never get bored. I personally like to start my days with their protein shakes. Head to factormeals.com/SeanChandler50 and use code SeanChandler50 to get 50% off your first box and
and 20% off your next month. That's code SeanChandler50 at factormeals.com/SeanChandler50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month.
So the sequence in the theatrical cut where for how Lois finds out that Superman, Clark Kent and Superman proves it, is that he trips and falls and his hands goes into a fire and it comes out and it's not burned. The original written sequence was this whole deal where she points a gun at him, pulls the trigger, and he goes, oh, well, now I guess you know, I can't believe you did that. What if I didn't? It wasn't Superman. She goes, well, it's blanks. And so it's like this a kind of she does outsmart Superman to trick him into revealing his identity with a gun with blanks in it. But they never shot that. But they used that scene for testing the actors when they were casting them before they shot the first movie. So they had literally a test footage of that scene. That's what's in the Richard Donner cut. It's test footage. Literally, when they didn't have their hair right, they didn't have the set. It looks like you're watching a play being filmed, and it's in the middle of the version. And because the original written ending was the turn back time, they repeat turning back time in Richard Donner's cut of Superman. So I think overall, I think the ideas are better in that version. I don't think the new director and the Salkinds came up with better ideas for Superman 2. But it's not a cleaner version. It is rough around the edges, and that's what kind of holds it back for me and why I think the two versions are essentially equal in my mind. Do you think Donner cut would have been better if they started with writing one movie at a time? Well, I mean, it doesn't, like, you can't really answer that question because that's not what happened. The reason that the Donner cut exists is because they wrote them together to shoot them together. That's why this exists. Like, what is the Donner cut if they wrote them separately? Well, doesn't that mean that they just wrote the first movie and then they would write the second movie after the first movie came out? In which case, that would have been whatever the Salkinds and the director. The Salkinds are the producers that might have had mob ties, that were the ones that produced the Reeves Superman films. They're the heroes and they're like the super villains of the narrative. It's fascinating. They're the whole reason it happened, and all the great stuff is great about it, but they're also the reason all the bad stuff happened too. A fascinating tale. The special features on the version from 18 years ago, amazing. Like, I love the documentary on the making of those movies just as much as watching the movies. It's one of my favorite making of documentaries ever. So I can't really answer the question, but I can say, I think if Richard Donner had been allowed to properly finish Superman 2 back in the day, wasn't fired, I think that easily would have been better than the version of Superman 2 that we got. And I really like Superman 2 theatrical, but Richard Donner's a better director that understands Superman more. The guy that did Superman 2 theatrical does not understand Superman. Just watch the third act of the theatrical cut and he's like ripping off the S from his shirt and he's multiplying himself. The guy didn't know who Superman was, so he invented powers for Superman. Why is Superman 3 a Richard Pryor slapstick comedy? Because the director doesn't understand Superman. Richard Donner understood Superman, so of course his version would have been better.
Most of these clips are pulled from my Patreon live streams. I do about 6 live streams every single month. For $2 per month, $20 per year, you can get access to all the exclusive videos and live streams. For $5 per month, you get your name on my end card. At the top tier, you get a 30-minute video chat with me each month. The link down below in the description has more information.